Growing up, my parents were really strict, and it's been something that I've been trying and failing to leave behind all my life. I don't want to delve too deep into my childhood memories on this thread, as it's been something that I've been avoiding. Although my therapist says that talking is good, so I've been trying to follow her advice and openly discuss my childhood traumas with anyone who would listen. No one really wants to listen though. No one wants to listen about my incredibly overbearing parents, the weird rules they had, about how I wasn't ever allowed to have friends around, never allowed out of the house past 7 p.m., and under no circumstances was I ever allowed out of my bedroom after 9 p.m. My parents never told me why. They just said it was when they could have their special time, whatever that meant. They made sure I abided by their rules by locking me in my room at night, so that I couldn't sneak around even if I wanted to. This became a regular, everyday occurrence and something that I slowly grew accustomed to, until I no longer asked questions, no longer cried when they told me for the 16th time that my friend Susan wasn't allowed in the house, and no longer worried them every hour for a glass of water or the bathroom. They installed a small cat flap into my room when I turned 10, outside of which they left me glasses of water and snacks if I got hungry. By this point, I was pretty much toilet trained and no longer needed to use the bathroom several times a night, which meant that I no longer needed the toilet bucket that they had been providing me with for as long as I can remember. Great parents they were, right? The only time I ever enjoyed living there with them was around the holidays. Christmas was the best time as I was never locked in my room at night, and this was because my parents once said that Christmas is the only time that they could take a break from their special hobby. I never knew what the hobby was and I was never allowed to ask. I did once and I was locked away at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. I never asked again after that. I hated it because I wasn't even allowed to keep my lights on either. I was just supposed to get in bed and sleep immediately. What child can ever go to sleep straight away? Several uneventful years passed, and I grew accustomed to my daily routine. Wake up, go to school, come back, read a book, go to bed, wake up and repeat. My mental health, however, was declining slowly but surely. I felt incredibly lonely all the time, and became very introverted, even in school. My friends didn't understand, so they stopped talking to me. My parents, well, I wasn't a priority to them, so it isn't something that overly concerned them. They thought it was just teenage hormones, not the fact that they had kept locking me away in my room every night for years, and not at all bothering to explain why. On the eve of my 13th birthday, October 4th, 1999, I decided it was time to find out. It was a pleasant evening, mild and ordinary. I had been quiet most of the day, but that's nothing unusual. Especially not to my parents, though they thought nothing of it when I decided to retire to my room early. 7:30 p.m. in fact. They didn't ask any questions, didn't even flinch. Both of them just sat there, looking somewhat despondent. But I thought it best not to ask questions. I had learned that the hard way by now. My plan was to wait until midnight, and I would climb out of the window and let myself back into the house with the keys that my parents never even knew I had. I waited patiently. Time was all that I had, and filling empty hours and staring at walls had become somewhat of a pastime for me. I was excited to finally break the monotony. Nervousness was an entirely alien feeling to me, so all I could do was sit and wait. Once it hit midnight, I stood up and I went to my window. I had learned how to be extremely quiet by now, so I didn't make a sound. Our house was quite tall and my bedroom was on the 3rd floor, so I was hesitant, of course. But I was quite a tall child by then, so I didn't worry too much about a sudden fall or slipping off the roof. I had been planning this for quite some time and was heavily prepared. And also, as I had mentioned, I was somewhat adept to my lack of emotion. I walked over to my bedroom window and opened it up. It was easy. My windows were never locked because my parents didn't take me as the gutsy type. I'd always been quite a timid child, quiet and receptive, so I knew they wouldn't expect this sort of behavior from me, and plus, they had drilled those impulses from me long ago now, with their cruelty. But I needed to find out what went on in the house. That urge was more powerful than the fear of the repercussions that I would receive, should I be discovered. I'm digressing, I do apologize. I was on the roof of my home, crawling slowly. I did this to avoid being seen, and to minimize the noise that I made when I heard a sound. It was coming from the direction of my parents' bedroom. I was crawling past their window. Annoyingly, the curtains were shut so I couldn't see anything. But that sound, it was peculiar to say the least. I crawled a little closer and realized that it was the sound of hushed whispers. The words were muffled, but in unison. It almost sounded like a chant of some kind. It was just me and my parents in this house, but the sound that emanated from the bedroom, it sounded like there were at least 10 people in there. It made me feel really uncomfortable, scared even, and that's not something that I was used to. It did, however, urge me to continue. I was even more intent on finding out what my parents were doing. I continued to crawl until I came to the roof of the second floor of the house. I was then able to get all the way down to the ground. The house was shrouded in darkness. I knew it was midnight, but still, it was sinister, eerie. I walked towards the front door and I opened it with the key that I had hidden at the bottom of my shoe. I opened it slowly to ensure that it didn't creak. It was an old house. What I saw as soon as I stepped through the door were candles. Candles absolutely everywhere. There was a candle on every single free space in the downstairs front room, kitchen, guest room, and even in the bathroom. I didn't even know that we had this many candles in the house. I continued to take small, cautious steps forward until I came to the bottom of the stairs. I could hear the chanting again, so I began to ascend the stairs. The closer I got to the top, the louder the chanting became. I couldn't hear what language it was, but it most definitely was not English. Eventually, I was homeschooled and my parents wanted me to learn as many languages as I could, so as I got closer, I perhaps thought that it sounded like Russian, but I didn't think it was a comprehensible dialect. Not one that normal people spoke anyway. The candles lined the upstairs hallway. Every single closed door had 2 candles on either side of them, except mine. I suddenly heard a quick shuffling behind me. I turned around, but the darkness in this house was so impenetrable that I couldn't make anything out. I looked down in front of my parents' bedroom, in the space that was illuminated by the 2 candles. I saw a pair of feet. I backed away quickly, but realized that I couldn't get back into my bedroom because I didn't have a key and, of course, it was locked. I felt what I assumed was panic surge through me so quickly. I went into the bathroom opposite and I locked the door. Candles illuminated the room, albeit dimly. I tried to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't work. I flipped the switch up and down a few times to no avail. And that was when I heard the shuffling again. But outside the door this time, which was then followed by a quiet but distinct knock. The knocking was slow, and it made my skin crawl. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. No answer. The knocking continued. As much as my parents were cruel and uncaring towards me, I knew they wouldn't do this. Someone else must be in the house. I couldn't understand though. We weren't allowed visitors, it was strictly forbidden. Perhaps that was only the case where I was concerned though. It wouldn't be surprising. I couldn't be sure. I sat on the edge of the bath for a while, keeping as still and as quiet as I possibly could. The knocking eventually stopped and I heard the sound of feet shuffling, moving away from the bathroom door, their motion slow and deliberate. I waited a further few minutes just to be sure, before I proceeded to slowly unlock and open the door. I was hesitant to leave the safety of the bathroom, but I couldn't stay in there forever. I took a step forward. Now let me tell you the bizarre thing I encountered when I found myself back on the landing again. As I mentioned before, the candles lined all the doors. There was a candle on either side. Candles all along the hallway, and all they did was illuminate the floor. Looking straight on, you couldn't see anything as the darkness was so thick, but the floors were visible. And that's how I was able to see the feet in the first place, but not see the body they belonged to. I couldn't explain it. Something else happened that I couldn't fathom. Our landing suddenly looked different. Strange, in fact. I was beginning to feel fear. It was spreading through me like wildfire. The upstairs landing seemed infinite. It was a ridiculous notion, of course, but it really did seem like it went on forever. Candles lined it as far as I could see. I turned around and saw nothing. The stairs, the doors, and the candles that lined them, they were all gone. What is going on? I whispered to no one, more to myself. It was then that I heard a cackle. It echoed around the whole place, got louder and louder until I felt like I could hear it in my head. It stopped as quickly as it had started, and I uncovered my ears when I suddenly heard it again, but this time directly behind me. I didn't turn around. I just ran down the infinite hallway until I felt like I was far enough away to warrant stopping. There was nowhere to hide here. I had no choice but to continue walking, so I did just that. I walked and walked until I came across an open book. It was so strange. An open book in the middle of an empty hallway. I know, I found it just as bizarre. What was even more bizarre, it's that it was one of my fairy tale books. One of my favorites, in fact. It was a book of Slavic fairy tales, which outlined many fantastic tales. But this one especially had a particular story about the Baba Yaga. A little background, as I mentioned. My parents were very cruel to me. I never felt loved, never felt anything really. So growing up, I delved into books. I would rather escape into a fantastical reality than be in my isolated one, so I read a lot. I had a particular fondness for fairy tales. For obvious reasons, so I got my hands on as many as I could. My parents encouraged this, so I had no issues getting a hold of whatever books I wanted. One Christmas when my parents ceased their special time, and I was no longer confined in my bedroom, albeit for a short while, they got me a present. It was something I didn't expect. They had never gotten me a gift in my life, not on Christmas, and especially not for my birthday, so it was certainly out of character for them. The book was called Russian Fairy Tales, and it wasn't a book that I had ever heard of before, so as much as I was reserved about this gift, I took it gladly. And plus, I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Who knows what they would have done if I was. It was a fascinating read, it really was. Although I won't say that it wasn't somewhat peculiar, especially the Baba Yaga story. So, there was this book, my book, on the floor, in the middle of the landing, surrounded by candles. It was opened on the Baba Yaga story. The Baba Yaga was a folklore story as old as time itself, retold and remolded many times. As I discovered after reading the book, the essence of the story is that the Baba Yaga is an old woman, a witch they say, and she is known to be mistakenly summoned by lost travelers. She appears to them, first in their dreams and then only at night. Another important aspect of the story is that she can be summoned to grant wishes, but at a price. The most common facet of the story is that she likes to harvest the souls of children. She cooks the children that she lures to her hut, deep in the woods, and she would first cook them in her large cooking pot, before devouring their heart, while it was still beating. Apparently, this was how she would harvest their souls. She was known to keep them alive for a while first, harvesting bits of their flesh. She needs children's souls to harness her power, which has an air of mystery around it. and hasn't much been explained in any of the books that I've read. Her appearance, as described in my book, is probably the most terrifying. The Baba Yaga is very old, very skinny, and horrendously ugly. She is often described to be grotesque, her body malformed. She has a long, distorted nose, mostly covered in warts and long, iron teeth. Her nails are long and sharp. She is described to have the most skin-crawling cackle. As I said, a fascinating story. I approached the book slowly, confused as to why it was there, when I heard a very distant but distinct scraping. It sounded like something or someone was scraping the walls behind me as they walked. I backed away, but I quickly picked up the book and I took it with me. I had no choice but to go forward. The scraping was getting closer and closer to me, and I had no desire to meet whoever or whatever was doing it. I walked and I walked fast. Where were my parents? I hadn't seen any doors or any windows ever since I left the confines of the bathroom. I was too scared to call out, in case whatever it was that was following me heard it. I continued on for a while until I came across a painting. I could still hear the distant scraping, getting closer. It was the same as the book, surrounded by candles, and it was a painting that I had never seen in our house before. It depicted a house that stood in the middle of the woods. An old, disused wooden hut that was supported by long, blood-covered chicken legs. The lights from the candles were faint, so I had to get a little closer to see the detail. In the doorway of the house stood a little old woman, and she was smiling, her mouth absolutely covered in blood. I can't explain the fear that was coursing through my body. I had never felt anything like it. I needed to get away from this painting. I continued walking, heavily disturbed, and what I saw then stopped me dead in my tracks. A little further away from me lay a human heart, surrounded by candles, and it was still beating. The heart lay beating slowly. I could see the blood coursing through the weary veins. Some of it was leaking onto the floor and was somehow beginning to surround the candles. I stood transfixed. Something was happening to me. The scraping was getting closer and closer, and I could feel the presence behind me, but I couldn't turn around. I willed myself with all my strength to turn around, but I just couldn't. I was utterly mesmerized by the heart. Helpless. Tears began to stream down my face when I felt something brush past my leg. A long, single strand of gray hair, but I couldn't see who it was. My eyes were fixed in the heart and I was unable to move them. What was happening? I tried to speak, but only a small whimper managed to escape my parched lips. And then I saw her. An old woman limped slowly into view. She hobbled past me as if I wasn't there, straight over to the beating heart. It was a hideous sight. She picked up the heart as I watched feebly and licked it. Her elongated tongue grazed the majority of the heart. Blood began to trickle down her monstrous lips, all the way down her bulging neck. It was then that I saw her iron teeth. They were blackened, sharp, and permanently stained by what looked like old speckles of blood. She bit into the heart, hard, and started chewing. The noise, my God, the noise. I had never heard anything like it. The crude smacking of her lips, the horrible crunching of the heart muscle was unbearable to my ears. She suddenly stopped and looked at me, really saw me, like she didn't properly see me until that moment. She looked deep into my eyes, and it was then that I started to hear whispers, but I couldn't make out anything tangible. It was a plethora of voices all around me. Baba Yaga began to walk towards me, her deformed stance made even more horrific by the bulge that was her back. She clutched the heart in her blood-covered claw. Droplets of blood fell on the floor. I was still immobilized to the spot by whatever trance she put me in. I could do nothing. She got so close to me that I could smell the foul air that permeated from her body, her mouth. She held the heart out in front of me, in front of my face. She held it so close that I could smell the familiar scent of blood, a metallic smell. She smeared the bloody heart all over my face. I couldn't even scream. I was completely incapacitated. Some of it got into my mouth. She cackled and then dropped the heart to the floor where it melted. She looked at me and whispered, "You are mine now." And then she was gone and I fell to the ground. My breathing was erratic and I passed out. I awoke a short while later, utterly dazed, and I could barely see anything in front of me. When my vision settled a little, I looked at my hands and they were completely covered in blood. The blood dripped from my fingers onto my legs, and that was when I saw the puddle of deep red. My vision was still somewhat blurry, but I thought I could make out a body laying on the floor a few feet in front of me. I looked all around me and panicked. I wasn't on the landing anymore. I was in a red room. There were no doors and no windows, and it was just me and the still body. Candles lined the perimeters of the room, and nothing else was there. Next to the body, a little further away, lay a book, a different one. I was too far away to see it clearly, but I knew it wasn't mine because mine was laying right next to me. I stood up slowly, unsure of my balance, but my legs held. I wiped my hands and began walking over to the body, to the book. My body completely overtaken by fear, my mind raced. I just didn't know what to do, how to get out. For once in my life, I really just wished that I had stayed in my bedroom. Maybe my parents did all this to protect me from her. But my curiosity was going to get me killed, or worse. Why didn't I just stay put? I moved over to the book. I wanted to avoid the body laying close by as much as possible, but I knew that I would have to look sooner or later. I shivered. Tears began to form around my tired eyes, and I wiped them away. When I edged closer, I saw the book was open. The writing was illegible to me. It was all in Russian, but it appeared to be some kind of spell book. It contained strange symbols and speckles of blood covered some of the pages. There were drawings in this book that were inconceivable to me. Drawings of torn open human bodies. Drawings of hooded figures with their hands covered in blood, holding human organs. Drawings of horned creatures devouring babies and children. One drawing in particular depicted the Baba Yaga surrounded by cloaked beings. All were kneeling around her in a circle. In front of her was a cooking pot, and one of the cloaked beings held a child in some sort of a sacrificial stance. It was the most horrifying thing that I had ever seen, aside from the Baba Yaga herself, of course. I shut the book and I threw it. Another part of her story that I should mention is that people have tried and failed to vanquish her. The stories about her span centuries, and she is believed to be one of the most elusive creatures ever encountered. She can be metaphorically shackled, though. She can be trapped by those who summon her for their own gain. But even then, those who bind her with a spell like that always end up paying a high price for trapping Baba Yaga, for using her powers. In the stories I read, she terrorized villages that mistakenly summoned her, or stumbled upon the disused hut that was supported by blood-covered chicken legs in the middle of the deep and thick forest. A hut that she inhabited, where she ate the hearts of children and consumed their souls. No one was ever able to truly destroy her. Not in those stories. It was hopeless, and I was utterly helpless. I didn't know how I was ever going to escape, and I really wanted to find my parents, to find out what in the world was going on, and why this was happening. Did they summon her? Was this their doing? Why? The Baba Yaga never rests. Once she is summoned, she never truly goes away. She never leaves those who have encountered her alone. I was crying when suddenly, the dead body in front of me twitched. I was frozen to the spot. The body twitched for several minutes before it slowly got up. It got up. There was blood all around it. I whimpered as it turned its blood-soaked face towards my fear-stricken one. I sat still for a moment before it began to slowly shuffle toward me, its arms reaching out. As it edged closer to me, I screamed. I screamed till my throat was red raw. The body, the animated corpse, it was my mother. The red room was small, quite rectangular, so I didn't really have any places to run to. The good thing was, the corpse that was my mother was slow, so I was able to get away from her by walking to the other side of the room. I knew that I couldn't do that forever and it wasn't sustainable, but for now, it would do. I just couldn't bear to look at my poor mother's face. "Mom, please," I pleaded with her. "Mom, what happened to you? Where's Dad?" I knew that she would be incapable of answering my questions, due to the fact that she no longer possessed a tongue. Could she understand me? I didn't know. This clearly wasn't my mother anymore. She was staggering towards me, her stance likened to that of a zombie. Heck, she was a zombie. Blood oozed out of her mouth, her teeth black. Her eyes were entirely devoid of life, any emotion. She was empty, a husk. All that was left of her was the awful essence of the Baba Yaga. These were the consequences I was telling you about. Let me tell you a bit about my mother. She was always kinder to me than my father was. Sometimes when my father would order me to my room, even though I was hungry and they had failed to feed me, I would catch these little sympathetic glances from her towards me, little sideways looks of pity. But still, she did very little to help me. My mother was always the one to leave my food outside my room though. Always the one leaving me bottles of water to drink. Especially in the summer when temperatures were stifling, and I was still confined. I always had a feeling that my father attempted to forbid these somewhat kinder gestures, but she continued. I really appreciated her for that. But other times, she could be just as cruel as my father was. She could be unkind and that would confuse me. She was the one that bestowed the gift of the Russian book that first introduced me to Baba Yaga. My parents barely ever spoke to me, aside from the usual, "Go to your room," or "Stop crying." So when I received the book, I took it as a kind gesture from my mother. I had no idea that it would turn into me being pursued and haunted by something that was supposed to be a simple, kind deed. The receiving of a good book. How was I supposed to know that this would happen to me? All that I ever yearned for was love and I never got it. Was she cruel to me? Yes. Did she love me? I doubt it. Nevertheless, she was still my mother and I loved her. I never wanted to see her like this. The dead thing that was my mother continued to pursue me in slow, deliberate motions, but I managed to dodge her advances every single time. I knew that I had to get out of the red room, but how? I didn't even know where I was. I was sure that I was no longer in our house since we didn't have any rooms that resembled this nightmare. My thinking was shrewd, fast. I picked up several candles and threw them at the corpse and watched as it writhed in agony, but still, it was relentless. It just kept coming and coming, trying to grab me at every turn. Strangely, as I threw the candles at my mother's corpse, I noticed that nothing else in the room was setting alight. The candles would hit the corpse and then just extinguish after hitting the floor. It wasn't normal, but then nothing was normal here. I decided to try something else. I ran towards the scattered books. I picked up my fairy tale book and I quickly moved towards the spell book before my dead mother got too close to it. I picked it up, thinking the reanimated corpse of my mother was the doing of the spell book, so I wanted to burn it. I tried to set it on fire, but it just wouldn't burn. I picked up several candles and tried to set it ablaze, but nothing happened. The book stayed perfectly intact. And then suddenly, I heard a piercing shriek. It shook the room like an earthquake. The dead body of my mother fell to the floor, lifeless once more. The red room crumpled around me, and as I shut my ears to stifle the sound, I noticed they were bleeding. I fell to the ground, the book scattering around me before I lost consciousness. I vaguely remember Baba Yaga flying across the collapsing room towards me on her mortar, aided by the pestle that also doubled up as her wand. Her spindly knees touching her crooked chin as she flew. I saw her blood-soaked mouth and her wide, demonic eyes coming towards me, as my own eyes fluttered shut. I awoke startled, disoriented, and completely engulfed by fear. I touched my face, my eyes, my mouth. Everything was still there, still attached. I felt for my pulse. It was beating, albeit erratically. My heart was still intact. I looked around me and cried out. I was in a forest, a deep birch forest surrounded by thick trees. The body of my mother was there too. It lay surrounded by candles not too far away from me. The body was limp, unmoving, dead, but I was cautious about taking my eyes off of it just in case. My attention was stolen away by a slow but monotonous chanting. The same chanting that I heard when I was back at the house. Amongst the chanting, I could also hear a plethora of different sounds, whispers and cries. It was the cries and whispers of children, men and women. I could hear the anguish in the voices of those lamenting. I stood up and that was when I saw the hut. The hut that was supported by giant blood-covered chicken legs. I stared at it horrified. The sight was picturesque. It looked just like the painting of the house and frighteningly resembled the illustrations from my book. I took a step backward when I saw its leg begin to move. Baba Yaga's hut was walking towards me, the chicken legs quivering as they took long and slow, deliberate steps. The ground shook as it walked. I wanted to shout, to scream, to run, but I learned by now that none of those things make a difference. All I could do was stand, transfixed to the spot as I watched in horror the things that were unraveling before me. As the hut got closer, I saw its horrific detail. The windows were lit and burned a deep red, and as it got closer, I could see that the windows possessed little blinking eyes on each corner that stared down at me. The door itself was a mouth, and it snapped open as it approached me, revealing hard, metallic teeth. The hut was death personified. Baba Yaga was death personified. The hut was adorned with human bones. There were skulls, torsos, hands, arms, legs, at every little nook and cranny of the exterior. The closer it got, the more horrific it looked. The illustrations in my book didn't know justice. They failed to outline the true terror of Baba Yaga's abode. It was then that the door with teeth opened, and Baba Yaga appeared, holding the still beating heart of her latest victim. She cackled as she looked down at me, and I suddenly felt very faint, nauseous, and not myself. I felt compelled to walk over to my mother's corpse. I didn't want to, but my legs just ended up taking me there. I had no control over my body. I stood over my mother's mutilated body with tears streaming down my face, unable to control what I was doing. Baba Yaga was next to me now. She made me kneel. She wiped the sweat from my brow with her skinny, rotting fingers, and then she made me eat my mother's rotting heart. I had no control over this. As I mentioned, so the deed itself was absolute torture. I couldn't do anything to stop myself. My limbs were alien, no longer mine, and were at Baba Yaga's every behest. I could still feel though, and I could still taste. Now, how can I describe to you what a rotting heart tasted like? They're right when they say that people taste like pork. The taste was bitter, acidic, and I don't know whether that had anything to do with the decaying of the heart. The blood though, my god, the blood. There was no metallic taste to it. I can't quite explain the taste of it, but it made me want to vomit. Have you ever smelled a rotting corpse? Well, it tastes as it smells. I remember feeling a horrible knot on my stomach. It made me recoil. I gripped my stomach so tight and I cried out. I didn't know what was happening to me. The pain was indescribable. like thousands and thousands of little knives stabbing me all at once from the inside. I think I passed out again right then. All I remember is the sound of Baba Yaga's shrill laugh. When I awoke, I was inside the hut, strapped to a sacrificial altar. There were hooded figures all around me, and they were chanting. I felt sick, faint, and like something was crawling inside of me. In the middle of the room was Baba Yaga, and she was holding another heart in her hands, high above her head. This one looked different though. It didn't look human. It was far too big and it was so black. The veins shone bright red and they pulsated. One of the hooded figures approached me and removed his hood. It was my father. "Hello, Anna," he said, smiling. "Dad, what's happening? Please help me. Please let me go. I won't leave my room again, I promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. And I really was sorry. I really wished that things could go back to the way they were, no matter how cruel they seemed. Anything was better than this. "I'm sorry, Anna, but that's not going to happen. Your mother and I have tried our best to protect you as much as we could. You must understand, this is not what we wanted, but Baba Yaga, she needs a new host. She is our god and we want to serve her well. We want to repay her for what she has given us, and we must be forgiven for what we've done. How we've shackled her for so long. There are lives at stake here. Your mother already lost hers." My dad replied, not a shred of emotion lining his cruel face. A host? What does that mean? Why am I strapped in like this? What are you planning to do?" I cried out at him. I screamed. I writhed, but it was no use. "It is no use, Anna. You have discovered her, and now you have to pay the price. I have to pay the price, as your mother has had to pay the price. Please, Anna, don't make this harder than it has to be," my father said, gently stroking my sweat-covered hair. I didn't say anything then. I just sobbed. I mean, what can you even say? My father continued, "It is a special privilege, Anna, a great honor, and you should consider yourself lucky to have been chosen. When the time comes, you will carry the Baba Yaga for centuries, and you will do great things with her," he said as he began to walk away. He looked at the Baba Yaga and at the other figures, and he spoke once more. "We must begin the ritual." Baba Yaga began walking towards me, the hooded figures, including my father, all knelt down as she passed. She was holding the strange black heart in her hand, and she cupped it and brought it close to my face. I turned my face away, clenched my mouth shut because I knew what she was going to do. She was going to feed that heart to me. "You must devour the heart, Anna. It is a sacred heart. It is her heart. Eat it," my father said, and I recognized that tone of voice. I had heard it so many times growing up. It was the voice of a father who, if you didn't do what he said, then you would be sorry you ever existed and defied the order. I already was sorry. Despite, I fought against my shackles. I fought as hard as I could against Baba Yaga's powers, but she overcame me. I started to feel like I did back outside, next to my mother's corpse, like I couldn't control what I did. I was suddenly fighting against myself. "Your efforts are futile, Anna. The Baba Yaga is strong, just please do as she commands. Do as I command, for God's sake. I'm your father, and you will obey," he bellowed. The Baba Yaga shot him a glance. She was in charge here. My father quickly returned to his place. I could see the fear forming on his face. I started shouting and screaming then, but Baba Yaga's powers quickly overwhelmed me, and I lay comatose but still conscious. I just couldn't move any part of my body. The Baba Yaga brought the heart to my lips and made me open my mouth and then made me bite down. And then she made me chew. Internally, I was screaming. I was gagging, and for the love of God, I just wanted to vomit. But I couldn't do any of those things. All I could do was lie there, still as a mouse, and chew the decaying heart of a century-old witch. When that was over, I felt a very sharp pain in my chest. A pain so profound, so agonizing that I thought I was going to die right there and then, on that altar. I had my bodily functions back, and I writhed so violently that I felt all the bones in my back literally crack and bend. I screamed until my voice was hoarse, and then it was over, just like that. I looked up hazily, my breathing shallow, and what I saw made me shout out once more. Baba Yaga held my heart in her hands. It was my still-beating heart. She put it in some sort of cauldron that was in the middle of the hooded figures. She cooked it, and then she ate it. The Baba Yaga ate my heart. "It is done," the hooded figure said. My father approached me then. "You are bonded to the Baba Yaga. You are one now, and when the time comes, it could be years and years from now, but the time will come and you will know. And then you will become the Baba Yaga. You, Anna, will be our god. You will be her," my father said. "Sleep now, child. Sleep. Tomorrow, everything will be new, different," he said, stroking my head once more. I drifted away then. I dreamt of Baba Yaga. So there you go. That's my life story. I encountered the Baba Yaga and I have not been the same since. And perhaps this is down to me not having a heart. As I mentioned, I attended therapy for many years following my encounter and the ritual. My therapist said that it was the trauma of the cruelty I received from my parents that brought on the illusion of what had happened to me. According to her, none of that ever occurred, and it was just my broken psyche attempting to make sense of my abuse. She said the stories that I read as a child fueled my overactive imagination, and that the first step to healing is to accept that. After a while, I started to believe it myself, but deep down, I knew that what happened to me was real. I knew that one day, I would become the Baba Yaga. I didn't have much of a life though. I suffered from constant nightmares. I lived a very lonely and isolated existence. It wasn't much different to how I grew up, so I didn't mind. I am much older now, and I still don't truly know when the time will come, or when she will come back for me. I will say one thing though. I've been feeling strange lately. I've been feeling hungry, all the time. The nightmares are becoming more vivid, more lucid. I dream of eating hearts. I dream of burning children, men and women, and devouring their hearts. I've been seeing Baba Yaga too. At first, it was in my dreams, but now, I see her at night before I go to sleep. She crouches on the top of my wardrobe, waiting for me, watching me, smiling, always smiling. I think it's going to happen soon. Now, all I crave for, all I think about, is blood.